Welcome to Samsara, Nirvana, and Buddha Nature. My name is Tenzin Tsepal, and I've been asked to lead a review tonight because Venerable Chodron is ill. She's recovering from a mild case of COVID. In fact, all but 2 Abbey monastics currently have COVID, but please don't worry. They're all resting and slowly getting better. You know, we've been COVID-free throughout the pandemic, when many people were extremely ill and in fact many dying. So we were talking yesterday on Zoom. We had a Zoom meeting and we were talking about how we feel quite blessed that we're finally getting COVID at a time when there's access to a lot of medicine, and those over 60 have gotten their Paxlovid regimen. And we have great medical care here in Pend County. So in addition to that, some very, very kind local practitioners have stepped in and started bringing us prepared food for lunch. Also, other people have been mailing in masks and cough drops and other essentials, so we are well cared for. I don't know why that touches me, but the kindness of others is really, really touching, especially in these times of need. I was away for 5 weeks, so I missed the whole fire evacuation drill that we went through a couple weeks ago. And I've just returned from 5 weeks of being away to this COVID epidemic here at the Abbey. But we're getting through it, and in another 5-10 days, everything will be back to normal, and we'll be relishing the thought of rest. So tonight I thought, as our motivation, we would take a little bit of time just to do some breathing meditation, and then I'll lead you through just a short meditation on Buddha nature, and just reflect on your own experience as we go through the meditation. See if it resonates with you, see what understanding you've gleaned from the teachings that Venerable's been giving, and we'll go from there. So turn off all your other devices and bring your full attention here to this experience that we're having together. And just take a moment to settle into a meditative posture. And let go of anything else you've been doing today or thinking about, worrying about. Just bring yourself fully present to this experience right now. Just check your posture, back straight, feet flat on the floor if you're sitting in a chair. And your right hand resting on your left with thumbs touching in your lap. Just tuck your chin slightly, and your eyes can be closed or slightly open as you wish. Shoulders relaxed and even. Just taking a nice deep breath into the body. Let yourself settle into the present moment right here, right now. And just follow the breath for a few moments. The in-breath, the out-breath. Just allowing the mind to settle as we focus on the sensations of each new in-breath and out-breath. As we think about Buddha nature, we might be asking ourselves, why should I be interested in this topic? What can this topic offer me? And what it comes down to is we need to have an interest in this topic because we want happiness. We don't want suffering. If we think about what makes all the problems in our world, in our lives, in our day-to-day actions, isn't it our own counterproductive emotions? Once they arise in our mind, they harm us in that very moment. They disturb our mind. And they also harm us in the long term as well. So these disturbing emotions accomplish nothing but trouble from beginning to end. There's no peace in our mind when there's anger or jealousy or greed, attachment, pride, self-hate. These states of mind disturb our peace of mind and cause us to act in ways that we'd prefer not to. The degree that our mind is controlled or influenced by afflicted states of mind, to that degree, we might be considered a negative person or a bad person, as someone who's unstable or unreliable, untrustworthy. And to the degree that our mind is controlled or influenced by positive or virtuous states of mind and emotions like love, compassion, kindness, faith, integrity, consideration for others, wisdom, then we're considered a good person, a positive person, someone who is reliable, trustworthy, even admirable. And to the extent that our care and concern for others increases, to that extent we cultivate our ability to cherish others. We will have a stronger inclination to act beneficially and kindly towards others and really make an effort to refrain from harming. So we can ask, are we stuck with the personalities and the temperaments that we have in this life? Or is it possible to change? Possible to increase the positive aspects of our mind and reduce or eventually eliminate the negative ones? So reflect for a moment how negative states of mind are not present all the time. They come and they go. They are impermanent. And all impermanent things have causes and conditions. And not just random causes and conditions, but precise, compatible causes and conditions. If negative states of mind come into being due to causes and conditions, then they are adventitious, arising as a result of certain factors rather than by design or inherent nature, and therefore they can be removed. And positive states of mind and emotions are also not present all the time. They too are impermanent and dependent upon compatible causes, and therefore they can be increased if we increase their causes. All sentient beings have mind, and the Buddha said that all sentient beings have Buddha nature. or Buddha potential, that it naturally exists within the very nature of our mind. And so that means that all of us have a certain potential to improve or develop our good characteristics and to rid ourselves of negative characteristics. And what allows for that mind, our mind, to change is its very nature, the ultimate nature. And the fact that our mind is empty of inherent existence. Or looking at it from the conventional point of view, our mind is dependent. It depends on certain causes and conditions. So we can change our state of mind in any moment by consciously changing the causes and conditions. And listening to teaching, studying, and meditating is definitely other ways to change our mind, to really nourish our mind in accurate ways of thinking. Because our mind depends on so many causes and conditions, like the object that we're focused on, previous moments of mind, previous conditioning, karma, our sense faculties, mental faculties. Our mind lacks independence. It lacks inherent existence. It's empty of existing by way of its own characteristics. So this is describing the ultimate nature of our mind. And this ultimate nature is what allows for the mind to change when the causes and conditions are changed. This emptiness, this ultimate nature of the mind, is what's called the naturally abiding Buddha nature. Naturally abiding because as soon as a moment of mind arises, this empty nature is naturally present as an aspect of that mind. Every moment of mind naturally lacks inherent existence because it arises independent upon something else, something other, like causes, parts being labeled. Although at times it may appear as if our mind is completely independent, inherent, concrete, solid, permanent, when we analyze, when we sit and watch our mind, even for 5 or 10 minutes, we'll notice that it's totally dependent on other things. Like the previous moment of mind, the object it focuses on, sense powers. The mind is also dependent on its parts, like the initial moment of the mind, or the middle part of the mind, the ending later part of the mind. So think about the fact that all minds at one time were stained with obscurations, even Shakyamuni Buddha's mind. But all minds have the same potential to be cleansed of all those stains and obscurations. And therefore, all sentient beings, including us, all sentient beings without exception, have Buddha nature and can become enlightened, can develop that potential all the way to full Buddhahood. So even though that the very nature of our mind and a Buddha's mind is exactly the same, there are some differences. The Buddhas have abandoned all that has needed to be abandoned, like the afflictions and the obscurations, and cultivated all their good qualities to their utmost extent. And we have the same potential. The incredible potential of our mind to be developed is the transformative Buddha nature of our mind. Because at the conventional level of our mind, every moment of mind arises due to causes, conditions, and can be influenced by those causes and conditions in a positive direction. Neutral minds can be turned to positive states of mind, and positive states of mind can be enhanced. So take a moment to recognize that you have already reduced some level of negative states of mind and negative actions since meeting the Buddha Dharma and since applying the Dharma to your life. That is evidence of the transformative Buddha nature. And reflect that you have already developed more positive aspects of your mind by applying the Lam Rim and other teachings since meeting the Buddha Dharma. So imagine just continually increasing the positive states of mind, like compassion and wisdom. Couldn't we increase them to a consummate level, completely overpowering all the afflictions? And wouldn't they naturally cancel out all the negative states of mind? So when we think about how Buddhas can give us protection, how they can give us refuge from the various levels of suffering, they do that by teaching the Dharma and by properly following the instructions found in the Lam Rim and other texts and putting them into practice. We will find that protection. So then we need to investigate, how are we currently putting the teachings into practice? How much time, energy, and resources are we actually devoting to developing antidotes to afflictions and cultivating positive states of mind? If we apply a little effort, we get a little result. If we apply a great effort, we get a great result. We can't buy protection from our own negative states of mind. We can't buy it like insurance. We can't get it from someone else. But by developing strong conviction and understanding of our own Buddha nature, we will have more energy to cultivate the antidotes to negative ways of thinking and really find the energy to develop positive ways of thinking and behaving. That's the transformative Buddha nature. And underlying that, what supports that is the ultimate nature of our mind, the emptiness of our mind, the naturally abiding Buddha nature. So why should we be interested in this topic of Buddha nature? Because we want happiness, lasting happiness, not just fleeting, temporary sensory pleasures. We want lasting happiness that the Dharma can provide. And we want to remove all our suffering and the suffering of all sentient beings. So let's use our study of the two types of Buddha nature to really develop conviction in the Buddha's teachings and in our own potential, so that we can bring about greater and greater transformation of our own mind, principally so that we can be of greater and greater benefit to all living beings. So take a moment to cultivate that bodhicitta aspiration in your own mind. Thank you. I mentioned I was recently in India, Sravasti, India, actually, participating in the first International Mahayana Bhikshuni Varsa, or Rains Retreat. And there were 128 nuns from 9 different countries and 20 different monasteries. And nuns from the Abbey were especially invited to lead the opening and closing ceremonies, or opening and closing Varsa rituals, because we're one of the few monasteries doing these rituals in English, and that was going to be the common language for the participants, although it didn't quite work out that way. We had to do a lot of translating. But it was kind of ironic, because here we were, 3 nuns from a relatively small monastery of 24 monastics, leading rituals for nuns who mostly came from larger monasteries in India, Nepal, Bhutan, Vietnam, and Taiwan. And I thought to share with you one experience. During the last week of the Varsa, there were 2 men from Gampa Services. They had returned to film some of the closing activities and ceremonies. And I introduced myself to the younger one. And when I told him I was from Sravasti Abbey in the US, he made a comment that really stayed with me. He said, "For such a small group of monastics, you all are making an incredibly big contribution to the Buddhist world." That was quite a compliment. It was something like that. Maybe those weren't his exact words, but it was something like that. And as I reflected on that over the days I was there, his comments rang true. I think primarily because of the extraordinary visionary leadership of our abbess, Venerable Thubten Chodron. Not only is she an accomplished practitioner and a prolific author, and the abbess of a growing and thriving abbey, but she's a real visionary. Someone who can see what's needed to help the Buddha Dharma flourish far and wide. That came to light this afternoon as I was preparing for this review. I was looking through the first volume of this series of the Library of Wisdom and Compassion, and I was reading the preface again about how these books came to be. And even as a young practitioner, Venerable could see that Westerners who didn't grow up Buddhist didn't start with the same worldview as our Buddhist counterparts. We actually needed to study the Lamrim topics in a different order that would suit non-Buddhists. And so she requested His Holiness to write such a Lamrim. Little did she know that he would get her to write a series of books using his material. But she requested this Lamrim for us, culturally non-Buddhist people. From teachings and interviews and the questions that Venerable would ask His Holiness, the manuscript became larger and larger and larger, and turned into now what's become 10 volumes. Well, 11 if you count Buddhism, One Teacher, Many Traditions. And she came to see the purpose of this series as like a bridge to fill a gap between some of the short Lamrim texts that Tibetan Lamas would often teach in the West and the longer philosophical treatises translated into English by scholars. Understanding that Westerners needed a more condensed presentation in our own language as a basis, to help us with our meditations on the Lamrim. This topic of Buddha nature is a good example, because have you ever come across a description of Buddha nature in a Lamrim text? Probably not. At least in the Gelugpa tradition, it's not part of the general outline of the Lamrim. Maybe in other traditions it is. I have seen a reference in a Kagyu Lamrim text by Gampopa, but that's an exception, I think. So Buddha nature is a concept that people from Buddhist countries probably grow up with, but it's a new concept for many of us in the Western world, or even in the Asian world, I would say. And it's not in the Lamrim, but it's discussed, it's taught in classic treatises like the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, the Ornament of Clear Realization, Sublime Continuum by Maitreya, and other Mahayana texts. So the average Buddhist practitioner may never come in contact with teachings on this. But how nice that Venerable thought to include it in this series, drawing from teachings that His Holiness gave on Buddha nature. And actually, it's a nice compliment when you think about it. It's coming at the end of a very long study of the middle scope, really focusing on true suffering and the true causes of suffering, the 12 links, the things that lead us to develop renunciation in our mind. And those topics are sobering. And we've been at that for quite a while. So Buddha nature is kind of like a little reward. It's like the flip side. Yes, we do have this suffering in samsara. It is the nature of a mind and a body controlled by karma and afflictions. But what's equally true is that we have Buddha nature. So I think it's brilliant that Venerable put these two topics, when she edited, she put these two topics back to back. In the preface that I was reading earlier, His Holiness clarified that this series wasn't just for Westerners, but for all those who have an interest in Buddhism, and particularly an interest in the Nalanda tradition. He makes a big deal about we are all practitioners of the Indian Nalanda tradition. In fact, I listened to a video of him recently where he said, he was talking to a group of Indians. He said, I may be Tibetan, but I think I'm more Indian than you because I study Indian texts. And he says that, this series is for not just for Westerners, but those who are keen to study and practice and who need a new approach to it. And I thought that was interesting because, we can study the classic presentation of the Lamrim as was taught in Tibet. I did that for many years. Venerable did that for many years. And those books are still available, that present it in that format, starting with How to Rely on the Spiritual Teacher, which is a little bit difficult for those of us who are new to this tradition. But he said that this includes, this series is for Tibetans born in the Tibetan diaspora who have modern educations. And it's also for Asians from Taiwan, Korea, Vietnam, Singapore, and so forth. People who are attending his teachings with increasing frequency and interest. It reminded me of a conversation I had with His Holiness Chetsang Rinpoche, the Rinpoche who sponsored the Varsa in India. As we were talking, I was describing the Abbey. I was offering him a set of books from Venerable and also a set of Vinaya booklets that we put together. And he was asking about the Abbey, and I mentioned that we have a number of young men and women who are joining the monastic life. And he made the comment that there are fewer and fewer people from the Himalayan region. Outside of a few Himalayan women, he said, there aren't very many Asians. There aren't as many Asians ordaining anymore. And so it made me wonder if it's possible that some of those in Tibetan and other Buddhist traditions also possibly need a new, fresh approach. We're 21st century Buddhists. We're connected globally through the internet, through phones, through media. In a way, we're all moving into a similar approach to life. And, perhaps some of the traditional ways of presenting the Dharma are difficult for people of this age, especially younger people, to really embrace and take on board. So here's this beautiful series of books that are available. And in India, I met a number of people who have been studying these texts by Venerable His Holiness. I also noticed that His Holiness added that he wanted this series to explain similarities and differences between the doctrines of the Pali and Sanskrit traditions. And so that's what Venerable has set out to do. In this section that we're looking at right now on Buddha nature, it starts out with a presentation of the Pali tradition, and then it goes right into the Sanskrit tradition, looking at the 4 Buddhist schools and the Vaibhashika, Sautrantika, Mind Only, Middle, Chittamatra, and Madhyamaka. It starts comparing, this progression of how Buddha nature is understood and presented in those different tenet systems. And so the reason I'm sharing with all of this with you is because I think keeping all of this in mind can help us stay enthused and encouraged, even when we come upon a section that seems overly complicated and difficult. Like the last chapter we went through on the mind and its potential, that was slow going. There was a lot of detail there, especially in some of the reviews. And also in this new chapter on Buddha nature, maybe you're coming across information that's brand new, you haven't seen before, haven't heard before. So with some effort on our part, these teachings found in the Library of Wisdom and Compassion will give us a well-rounded understanding of what's taught and practiced in the Theravadan tradition, the Chinese and Tibetan Mahayana traditions, and even a little bit about the Vajrayana traditions, so that we can help fulfill one of His Holiness's 4 main pillars or principles. The one about promoting interreligious harmony, not just isolating ourselves. As Tibetan Buddhists, we don't have anything to do with Chinese Buddhists or Theravadins. That would be unfortunate. There's so much richness in each of the traditions and so much that we can learn from each other. I saw this recently at the Varsa, that most of the nuns were from the Kagyu tradition, either the Drikung Kagyu or the Drupta Kagyu traditions. And so in some of the teachings and sharings, we were using the same words, but it was obvious that we had different understandings and different usages of those words. And so I found it very enriching to my own practice. I was receiving teachings from Master Guogong, who is from the Chinese tradition in Taiwan, as well as Ken Modroma, who was in the Drikung Kagyu tradition. So it was very interesting. So I just offer that as maybe something to think about, and to really take that on board and put a little bit more effort and energy into preparing for the classes that Venerable's giving. It makes such a difference to read through the material beforehand, before she comes and gives the teaching. Otherwise, we're just trying to catch up with where she is in the book. If we read ahead, we have some basis for those teachings to land. So that's very important, to take time, make time for that. And then also, after receiving the teachings from her, to take time to review them. And I appreciate that in Singapore, I think the FOSAs still get together and discuss the teachings. That's wonderful. That's such a powerful way to put stronger imprints on their mind, so that we'll remember more of the material. Okay. So in this chapter on Buddha nature, we've begun talking about the different Buddhist schools. First talking about Buddha nature from the Pali tradition, from their point of view. And then I think we could say that the rest of the chapter falls under the Sanskrit tradition. And so on page 292, when we are looking at the Arya disposition according to Vaibhashika and Sautrantikas, it says the Tenets schools put forth assertions about the disposition that accord with their general presentation of the basis, path, and result of practice. And that's a very rich sentence. Unless we've been exposed to a topic called Buddhist tenets, we might find this sentence a bit confusing. It might just go right over our head. Yesterday, I shared an overview of Buddhist schools in the review I did for engaging in the Bodhisattva's deeds. And I was encouraged by a couple of people to share it again here tonight to provide some context about when we read or hear these words, Vaibhashika, Sautantrika, Chittamatra, Madhyamaka, Svatantrika, Prasangika. So I'm just going to go through that quickly. It may be familiar material to some of you, and it may be brand new to others, but I hope that it will broaden our understanding, and especially as we go through the rest of the volumes, we definitely will come across these different Buddhist tenet schools again. So to have just a broad overview of them can be quite helpful. So let me share my screen with you. The presentation of tenets. There's a famous quote by the Buddha. Let's see if I can remember it. It's something like, maybe I can find it. They're not going to pop up right away. Anyway, it's something like, I have two modes of teaching. Here it is. My doctrine has two modes. This is from Cutting Through Appearances by Geshe Lindup Sopa and Jeffrey Hopkins, a very good book on tenets, if you have the opportunity to study that. He says, my doctrine has two modes, advice and tenets. To children, I speak advice, and to yogis, tenets. So people who are really interested in understanding the most subtle aspects of the Buddha's teachings, the teachings on emptiness, it's particularly important that we have an understanding of tenets, because the most subtle presentation of emptiness is really too subtle for us to get our minds around. And so we look at this gradual presentation of starting from a more coarse explanation, and then refining it a bit more, and finally coming to the most refined presentation in the Prasangika Madhyamaka presentation. And so it's helpful to study tenets. But let me just explain a little bit about how that works. So, basically we could divide all of the Buddha's teachings in terms of fundamental vehicle teachings and universal vehicle teachings. We used to use the words Hinayana and Mahayana, but those have fallen out of favor for obvious reasons. The fundamental vehicle, those include teachings that most of us share. They are fundamental to all Buddhist practitioners. And then the universal vehicle includes teachings on bodhicitta, the the six paramitas as motivated by, or the six perfections as motivated by bodhicitta to bring about full awakening. So this is like a basic framework, fundamental vehicle teachings and universal vehicle teachings. But we can divide that a little bit further. So within the fundamental vehicle teachings, we find two schools. The Vaibhashika school, or in English, it's translated as the Great Exposition School, and the Sautrantika school, or the Sutra school. Both of these schools assert selflessness of person, but they don't assert a selflessness of phenomena, which are both are necessary to realize the most subtle aspects of emptiness and to bring about full awakening. So this is why this is important. There are many ways that we can compare these two schools, and we'll get to that in just a minute. And then within the universal vehicle schools, we find the Chitta mantra, or the mind only, and the Madhyamaka, or the middle way school. I should actually put an S on that. It's schools. Whoops. Okay. Can't correct it while it's in screen sharing. So so these are the four main Buddhist tenet schools found within Buddhism. And it's important to recognize that although we use these terms were not actually spelled out by the Buddha himself, but have been developed over the centuries, first in India by some of the Indian scholars when they began recognizing different tenets, different assertions, different conclusions that practitioners were coming to about what the Buddha taught. And so then and also if you think about it, at the time of the Buddha, people spread out and there was no internet, there was no telephone or television for that matter. So practitioners were isolated, and so they developed their understanding in isolation. And unless they made effort to join with other practitioners, and sometimes they may have been walking for a long time, they were in their own little Buddhist group of understanding. Later on, at some of the large monastic seats in India, there were practitioners of all these different schools together, and they would learn from each other and challenge each other, debate with each other to help each other learn. But initially, maybe these, especially, well, yeah, that's enough. Okay. So then universal vehicle practitioners, Chitta mantra, Madhyamaka. Let me show you the next slide. So what we call today when we're studying tenets, what we call the Vaibhashika, is actually a combination of 18 sub-schools that were active at the time of the Buddha or shortly after his parinirvana. And then within the Sautrantika school, again, if we think about that as a gradation, it makes a lot of sense that there were people with all sorts of understandings and assertions of the Buddha's teachings. And eventually there came to be these two groups within Sautrantika, followers of scripture and followers of reasoning. And so I've highlighted the followers of reasoning because when we study tenets, as it's laid out by Tibetan Buddhists, when we study Sautrantika, we're primarily studying the followers of reasoning. So we have these two fundamental vehicle schools. And then within the universal vehicle, same thing. Chitta mantra also has followers of scripture and followers more of reasoning. So what's interesting is followers of scripture are probably more like the previous school, the school you might say that was before them. And the followers of reasoning are leaning towards the next school, but not quite there. So within Chitta mantra, when we study tenets, we're primarily following or studying the followers of scripture. So I've highlighted that. And then within the Madhyamaka, there are further divisions, the middle way schools. There's the Svatantrikas, middle way autonomy, and the Prasangikas, the middle way consequent school. And even within Svatantrika, there's a further division. Those who follow more some of the tenets that are found in the Sutra school. So there are the Sautrantika, Svatantrika, Madhyamakas, the Sutra Autonomy Middle Way school. And then there are some that are more closely following the Chittamatra. So they're called the Yogacara, Svatantrika Madhyamaka, or the mind-only Autonomy Middle Way school. And then there's the Prasangika. And, even within Prasangika, although there are not specific divisions, there are certainly people with different points of view. Often when we're studying, we hear this phrase, well, there's debate about that. There are different points of view. So keep in mind that this pedagogy of tenets was developed really as a highly systemized, it became a very highly systemized way of studying all these different understandings of what the Buddha had taught. And they may seem kind of regimented, like all Vaibhashikas think this. That's not actually the case, but that's how it's studied for purposes of debate, so that there's some hard and fast, presentation of Vaibhashika that people learning this subject can compare and contrast with what's found in the other schools. Okay, let me show you one more thing that will connect this to the sentence that I read from our book. When we look at Buddhist tenets, and particularly in the book that I mentioned, Cutting Through Appearances, there's the great exposition. There's a presentation of tenets. And this is how each of those sub-schools is laid out. Each of them has a definition, and it has divisions or sub-schools. That's the second division. And there's a section on etymology of the name of the school. Why are people called Vaibhashika or Great Exposition? Explains that. And then notice that assertions of tenets, now that's where we get the bulk of their assertions or their established conclusions, what they've concluded from studying and reading and the Buddhist teachings. And that's broken into three: the assertion of the basis, the path, and the result. So within each of these four Buddhist tenet schools, there's a very detailed explanation of the basis, looking at their assertions regarding objects, like what exists. That's where we get objects of knowledge. When we were studying debate a couple years ago. So explaining what exists, what do they think exists, and assertions of object possessors. What knows those objects? What is their illustration of person? And what kind of consciousnesses does each school propound or assert? So the basis, that's where we find the explanation of the two truths. And then there's the assertion of the path. And this is where we find the objects of observation on the path. Path meaning one who has entered primarily the true paths of seeing and beyond. What is that meditator? What is that yogi observing? What are they looking at to understand the empty nature of the mind? And what objects are abandoned on that path? So that's a very important section. And that's a lot about paths and grounds, actually. So that's a whole nother topic, philosophical topic. And then there's also a section on the nature of the five paths, what they assert in terms of the paths and how many final vehicles there are. The first two schools assert three final vehicles. They say there are people who cannot achieve complete Buddhahood. But, and the Chittamantrans following scripture also have that assertion. But from the Chittamantrans following reasoning on up, All of the rest of the schools assert one final vehicle, that everyone can achieve Buddhahood. So, that's where that's explained. And we can compare and contrast from the Vaibhashikas, the Sautrantikas, middle way, or mine only, and then the two middle way schools. And then there's an assertion of the results of the path. What kind of results of the path are spelled out. So, let's see. So someone online is asking, is Yogacarya the same as Chittamantra? It's another translation or another name for the Chittamantra school. Yes, that's right. So that brings us back to this line that we found on page 292. The tenet schools put forth assertions about the disposition, meaning the lineage or the Buddha nature, that accord with their general presentations of the basis, path, and result of practice. It was a long way to explain that, wasn't it? But hopefully that gives, especially those of you who are new to that kind of presentation, it gives you a little more information. Okay. Another topic that comes up in this section is talking about Buddha bodies. And maybe some of you are familiar with that term, but maybe that's also kind of new. But this is related to these two types of Buddha natures. So I thought to just give a little explanation about that. And actually, there will be more explanation about Buddha bodies when we get to volume 4, and we're talking about the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha in a lot more detail. We'll learn more about this. So notice how this is a much broader presentation of the Lam Rim, probably than you've ever had, including topics that have not been assembled this way. And this is one of the unique features of His Holiness, is that he assembles, he's able to draw a lot of topics together in a new way, in a fresh way, and present them and make connections that we haven't made before. So on page 296, I was noticing in that section on Madhyamaka, the second paragraph from the bottom, it says, the Sublime Continuum defines Buddha nature as phenomena that have the possibility to transform into any of the Buddha bodies. Now, if you haven't heard that term before, you might be thinking, well, what are Buddha bodies? And then it goes on to say it's of two types, the naturally abiding Buddha nature and the transforming Buddha nature. So let me just share a little bit about these Buddha bodies. And we can talk about the 2 Buddha bodies, the 3 Buddha bodies, 4 Buddha bodies, 5 Buddha bodies. There are different ways of parsing out these Buddha bodies. But when we complete the accumulation, we talk about aiming for completing the 2 accumulations of method and wisdom. And when we complete those accumulations, that's when we attain Buddhahood. And at the same time, we attain all these Buddha bodies. So it comes at the same time of Buddhahood. They happen simultaneously. So again, let me try to share. Oops, sorry, I'm not quick about the sharing yet. There we go. Okay. Whoops, have to go through those. Okay, here we go. So if we look at the 2 bodies of the Buddha, it's interesting to see where they come from. So it's said that the accumulation of wisdom is what leads to or creates the imprints for the truth body or the Dharmakaya, the truth body of a Buddha. And here, when we use this word body, it's more like in terms of a collection rather than flesh and blood body. We're not talking about that kind of body. We're talking about a collection. So this accumulation of wisdom becomes the truth body, or the collection of the Buddha's wisdom, we could say. We could say it like that. And that's what we're accomplishing for our own benefit. That's when we have completely eliminated all the afflictive obscurations and all the cognitive obscurations, and we are completely out of suffering. We have the mind of an omniscient Buddha. But Buddhists don't stop there. Of course, they also have the accumulation of merit, and that's what gives rise, that's what creates the imprints for the form bodies. At least this is a sutra or perfection presentation, creates the imprints for the form body, the Nirmanakayas. And these are how Buddhas benefit sentient beings. So this is the presentation of 2 Buddha bodies. We can expand this to the 4 Buddha bodies. So the truth body can be, or the Dharmakaya can further be divided into the wisdom truth body, the Jnana Dharmakaya, say that 10 times fast, and the nature truth body, or sometimes it's called the essence body. This is part of the challenge, isn't it? In English, there are so many different translations for these terms. I think Venerable uses nature truth body in volume 4, so we'll stick with that. Wisdom truth body, nature truth body. So the wisdom truth body is the wisdom mind of the Buddha, and the nature truth body is the emptiness of that omniscient mind, that omniscient wisdom mind. And then that mind can manifest. This is the enlightened activities of the Buddha, right? That mind can manifest in any form it needs to. So it manifests in terms of the enjoyment body, the Sambhogakaya. That's the form that the Buddhas take in the pure realms, teaching high-level bodhisattvas, Arya bodhisattvas, teaching them the Mahayana Dharma, and then the emanation bodies. And even though we talk about 3 different types of emanation bodies, we don't count them as, what would that make? 6 or 7 Buddha bodies. That's not where the 5th one comes from. But anyway, let's just look at these emanation bodies. So there's the supreme emanation body, the body of the Buddha, the person, the Buddha who is a wheel-turning Buddha. That's what that's referring to, supreme emanation body. Like Buddha Shakyamuni, he's a supreme emanation body. It's said that's why he's depicted with hair instead of a bald monastic. One teacher explained it that way. There's also artisan emanation bodies. Buddha's manifesting as artisans to bring beauty into the world. And then there are also other emanation bodies, like, for instance, maybe you've heard of Buddha's manifesting as bridges, to be of benefit to sentient beings. So actually a Buddha can manifest in any form. Basically, a Buddha's mind can manifest in any form it needs to, any form that we've created causes to receive from a Buddha. So bridges, teachers, books, probably anything. In fact, Lama Zopa Rinpoche once said that he thought that Buddhas were manifesting as airplanes to help people get where they needed to go. I'm not sure about that, but it was interesting to think about. Let's see, yeah, that's all I wanted to say there. So someone is asking, do you recommend reading the books in order, or can I follow along with this book and then read the previous books? Start where you are. Yeah, if you're starting with volume 3, there is quite a bit of material in volume 2 in particular that will be necessary for understanding further teaching. So if you can do both at once, that's great. Or maybe set aside some time during the holidays to read through volume 2 and kind of catch up. Or if you have time to watch all the teachings that Venerable gave on those, that would be ideal. But also, we can, if we have the whole series, we can use these books as amazing resources. So find out what works for you. I would say it's a little bit hard if you're starting with volume 3, because in a presentation of the Lam Rim, or the graduated stages of the path to awakening, volume 3 is really all about what we would call the middle scope. It's the teachings that a person who is aiming for personal liberation needs to really work with and develop in their mind to bring about personal liberation. And also keep in mind that in this particular series of the Library of Wisdom and Compassion, the order is going to be slightly different from the traditional Lam Rim outline presentation, because these have been designed for Westerners and younger generations of Asians. Hope that answered your question. Okay. Just a minute here. So the wisdom body is the omniscient mind of a Buddha, which has what we typically talk about as 3 principal qualities. It has knowledge or wisdom. Buddhas know all phenomena simultaneously. Has compassion. They seek to benefit all sentient beings without any hesitation. And then they have power or ability to benefit all sentient beings. From their own side, they lack anything that would impede them from exercising all the skillful means that they have at their hands. Let's not get into the 5 Buddha bodies. Actually, it kind of matches up with what we're talking about. So, no, I'm not going to do that. Okay. All right. So what I thought might be helpful is just to come back to this section in the text, starting on page 296, Buddha Nature according to the Madhyamaka school, and just look at some of the definitions and really try to understand them, so that going forward, we have, that solid basis. So notice on page 296, the second paragraph from the bottom, it says, and this is from Sublime Continuum, it says, it defines Buddha nature as phenomena that has the possibility to transform into any of the Buddha bodies. So it's of 2 types, the naturally abiding Buddha nature and the transforming Buddha natures. Both exist in all sentient beings, whether they are on a path or not, whether or not they are on a path. So all beings have these 2 Buddha natures. Okay, so let's look at the naturally abiding Buddha nature. And one thing that I've learned over the years is it's helpful when you see a definition to try to break down its components, really try to understand each of its components. And then that helps it to stick in our mind. So the naturally abiding Buddha nature is the emptiness of the mind that is yet to abandon defilements. In other words, it's together with a mind that has stains or defilements. Okay, so that's ordinary beings. You're not going to find this in a Buddha's mind, because a Buddha's mind is not together with stains or defilements. Okay, so it's in the minds of sentient beings. Sentient beings and Buddhas are mutually exclusive. If you're a sentient being, you are not a Buddha. And if you are a Buddha, you are not a sentient being. Those 2 things, if we look at beings in general, there are sentient beings, and there are Buddhas. And that's how that's divided. So that can be helpful to hang on to. Okay, so the emptiness of the mind that is yet to abandon defilements and that is able to transform into the nature dharmakaya of a Buddha. So when we think about the nature dharmakaya of the Buddha, that's the emptiness of the Buddha's omniscient mind, right? So something that is able to transform into the emptiness of a Buddha's mind must be an emptiness already. So the naturally abiding Buddha nature, and that's what this section is proving or really making a point to bring out, is that what we're talking about here in the naturally abiding Buddha nature is emptiness. There is our minds, each one of our minds has an aspect or a characteristic of being empty, but it's the emptiness of a mind, at least in my case, a mind that is together with stains or defilements. Okay. But the emptiness of my minds right now, even virtuous minds, they're together with stains because I still have self-grasping ignorance at the basis of most of those minds. So they're together with stains. But that is what is going to eventually transform into the nature truth body, the nature truth body of a Buddha, that emptiness of the wisdom truth body, the Buddha's omniscient mind. Okay, so it has those two qualities. It's the emptiness of a mind that is yet to abandon defilements, and it's able to transform into the nature. Dharmakaya means truth body, the nature Dharmakaya or the nature truth body. Venerable likes to hang on to some Sanskrit terms for various reasons. Truth body doesn't really say much to us, but Dharmakaya, maybe we connect that with the Buddhas. So I don't know. We'll have to ask her. Okay, so that's enough on that. Okay, then the transforming Buddha nature on page 298, it has a number of parts to it. Well, it says it's the seed for the unpolluted mind. Okay, so I don't think that's a definition. That's just a kind of a description. The transforming Buddha nature is the seed for the unpolluted mind. A seed for a mind is something that can transform into a mind, right? Like we all have seeds on our mind. We have seeds of loving kindness and compassion. We have seeds of anger. We have seeds of arrogance, all the rest. We have seeds for every type of mind, positive and negative. And when those seeds meet with conditions, they influence the kind of mind that arises next. Okay, so this transforming Buddha nature is a seed for the unpolluted mind that it will become, the Buddha's omniscient mind, the wisdom Dharmakaya. The transforming Buddha nature includes neutral mental consciousnesses as well as virtuous mental factors, such as love, compassion, wisdom, and faith, and other virtuous mental states. So neutral consciousnesses. So think of, rather than going back to screen sharing, think about consciousness up here as like a big category. And then over here, think about main minds or primary minds. Like we have 6 primary minds. We have primary visual consciousness, primary auditory consciousness, olfactory consciousness, gustatory consciousness, tactile consciousness. We have the 5 sensory consciousnesses. We also have the primary mental consciousness. Okay, so that's talking about all of the mental primary consciousnesses. And on the other side, there are mental factors. So that's how consciousness is divided. Mental factors can be positive, can be afflicted, or they can be neutral. Not sure that's helpful, but anyway. So when it says the transforming Buddha nature includes neutral mental consciousnesses, it's talking about the primary mental consciousness, but also it's talking about all the neutral mental factors that accompany the primary mental consciousness. Okay. And then it also includes virtuous mental factors. So it doesn't include the 5 sense consciousness. Actually, there's a note in here that says there's a little, note 80 says there's a little debate about this. So we'll hold out some suspicion, but in general, I think it's fair to say, it doesn't include the sense consciousnesses. Those don't transform into the omniscient mind of a Buddha. It's the mental consciousness that we use to meditate on emptiness with. Okay, so further down, the transforming Buddha nature also includes consciousnesses that form the collection of wisdom. So all the wisdom minds, the principal cause of the wisdom truth body, and the mind visualizing ourselves as a deity, which is the cause for a Buddha's form body. So the perfection vehicle, or the sutra vehicle, and the tantra vehicle have different ways of presenting how method and wisdom come together in one mind to become a Buddha's omniscient mind. And there's more description about that later in this section, so we'll come to that. A little bit further down, it says, at the time we become Buddhas, our naturally abiding Buddha nature will become the nature truth body of a Buddha. Okay, so our naturally abiding Buddha nature, the emptiness of our mind, will become the nature truth body, the emptiness of a Buddha's mind. And our transforming Buddha nature will become the wisdom truth body of a Buddha. In other words, the Buddha's omniscient mind. So the accumulation of wisdom plus all the mental, neutral mental consciousnesses and the virtuous mental factors, all those have the potential to transform into the wisdom truth body of a Buddha. Now, just a little bit more here. It says, the next paragraph says, which of the 7 types of awareness can be included in the transforming Buddha nature? So for this person who asked this question, actually, we learned about the 7 types of awareness in volume 2. So here's a good time, if you've been listening to all these teachings, here's a good time to break out volume 2. I think it's on page 121, and review those 7 types of consciousness. So just very briefly here, wrong consciousnesses such as resentment, self-grasping ignorance, and the mind that fantasizes as being a star athlete without creating the causes are not Buddha nature. So wrong consciousnesses are not going to transform into Buddha nature. They're wrong consciousnesses. They need to be abandoned. Inattentive awareness are not Buddha nature because they don't correctly know their object. So we can eliminate them. Can you come up with the other 5 without looking at the book? Well, they're listed here. Correct assumption, doubt inclined to the correct conclusion. So not all doubt, like, for example, not doubt inclined toward the wrong conclusion and not equal doubt, but doubt inclined to the correct conclusion. That's included. Inferential cognizers, correct mental direct perceivers, and subsequent reliable cognizers are transforming Buddha nature. So again, it's just a couple of sentences there, but that's a paragraph that you could really sit and think about for a long time and get really clear in your mind so that we can come to a very strong conclusion about what is it in my own mind that's going to transform. It's going to be included in transforming Buddha nature. And then when we notice that there are other types of mind present, we can say, that's not transforming Buddha nature. I'm not going to indulge in that mind. Now that would take a lot of awareness, wouldn't it? But that's the beauty. That's how we can use this information right here by being familiar with those 7 types of awareness and also observing in our own mind stream when those different types of awareness are present and which ones are actually going to lead us all the way to Buddhahood. Okay, that's probably enough for one night. It's just a review after all. Do you have any other questions that have come up? For my own side, having done a bit of philosophical study over the years, at first it's like a new language and it hits you, and, none of us like to feel like we're stupid. But sometimes, you can start to feel kind of dull, like, oh, I don't get it. What are they talking about? But what I've noticed is that the first time you hear some of these philosophical terms in particular, it's difficult. But then you hear it a second time, and now there's something for it to land on. We have some context because we've heard it before. And then you hear it a third time and a fourth time, and pretty soon you become quite facile with it. You become familiar with it. You understand it. It's like learning anything. Well, it's like learning anything difficult. It does require some effort on our part. And I hope that tonight you have found a little bit of encouragement for putting in the effort that's required to understand these beautiful teachings, because they have a huge consequence to bring to our lives. This is what's going to help us develop these potentials that we're carrying within our own mind stream right now, and allow us to be able to be of the greatest benefit to all sentient beings. That's really the purpose. I haven't listened yet to Geshe Chudrak's teachings from his last course, but I heard he was making a real distinction that, bodhicitta is the aim to benefit sentient beings by becoming enlightened. Usually we talk about it the other way, the wish to achieve full enlightenment so that we can be of greatest benefit to all sentient beings. But he was emphasizing, because we want to benefit sentient beings, we must become enlightened. Right now, if I look at my own experience, I'm quite limited in what I can do to help others. I can share what limited knowledge I have. I can share my energy and pitch in where I'm needed. But to really bring about lasting happiness, to understand what it is people need to learn and how to convey the Dharma in ways that people of different dispositions and different interests, different capacities need to hear it. I don't have that capacity, but Buddhas do, using their omniscient mind to know all sentient beings. This is what Buddhas do. So with that in mind, let's just take a moment. Another question. Is it necessary to study this in order to practice? No, we can practice wherever we are with what makes sense to us. That's most important. Find the things that make sense to you. And if we're very new to Buddhism, the things that often make most sense is, how can I lessen the afflictions which create a lot of problems for me in my life? And how can I increase these positive aspects of myself that I like about myself? I want to be loving. I want to be compassionate. How do I increase that? That's really the first things that we're doing when we become involved in Buddhism. So if you're new to this, this is a bit advanced. Yeah, it's true. And there are plenty of teachings on thubtenchodron.org that are certainly more introductory and more appropriate for people who are new to Buddhism. So if that fits a description of you, I encourage you to take a look at thubtenchodron.org and scan through. There are thousands and thousands, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of teachings there of every kind. So have a look there, and you'll find something there if you find these teachings are a little bit too advanced for you. Okay, there's a question. I heard that it's better to only practice one yidam in meditation. Is that true? And if yes, how do I choose the right yidam? You know what? I'm not the person you need to be asking that question of. That's a question for your main teacher. Anything having to do with Tantra, check with your teacher. So I'll leave that one for Venerable Chodron. Okay. All right. So let's take a moment to rejoice that we've had a little bit of time tonight, hopefully to clarify a few things, maybe familiarize a little bit more with our mind, and really thinking about how each of us already contain we already possess these two Buddha natures, these two aspects of Buddha nature, and both of them can be developed all the way to Buddhahood. That is an aspect of each one of us. So, we should wake up in the middle of the night and rejoice. I have Buddha nature. Or we can use it in syllogisms. Those of you who are familiar with syllogisms, I am worthy of love and compassion because I have Buddha nature. That is a very good thing to repeat to yourself. So anyway, let's rejoice that we've had time tonight to come together, meditate a little bit on Buddha nature, think about Buddha nature, think about the 4 schools of tenets, and putting some seeds on our mind stream. And let's direct all of this positive energy that we've built up towards quickly achieving full awakening so that we can have the skillful means of a completely enlightened Buddha and be able to benefit all sentient beings most efficiently, effectively, expediently. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind not yet born arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. In the snowy mountain pure land, you're the source of good and happiness. Powerful Tenzin Gyatso Chenrezig, may you stay until samsara ends. May the spiritual teachers who lead me on the sacred path, and all spiritual friends who practice it, have long life. May I pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous actions spread in the 10 directions. May the light of Lo Song's teachings dispelling the darkness of the beings in the 3 worlds always increase. We don't usually get to recite Venerable Chodron's long life prayer because she's in the room leading the class, but let's do it tonight because she's not here. Peerless Supreme Spiritual Leader, Omniscient King of the Shakyas, Motherly Tara, Supreme Bestower of Longevity and Wisdom, Vast Ocean Assembly of Sources of Refuge, grant propitiousness here and now for a nectar of benefit and bliss flow. With a clear mind of extensive learning gained from following the wondrous tradition of Thubten, the Able One's teachings, you bring clarity to masses of disciples with the light of children, the lamp of the Dharma. May your lotus feet remain unfaltering for a very long time. Through your dharmic deeds of hearing, thinking, meditating, and so on, place those who seek the liberated path in harmony through immaculate discipline. Please lead all beings to liberation with undeclining excellent qualities of scripture and insight, and establish them in the glory of eternal bliss. May the deeds of explaining and practicing the Dharma, done by groups supporting the teachings and their upholders, who spread the view of dependent arising and nonviolent actions in the 10 directions, and especially at Sravasti Abbey in the west, flourish. Good night, friends. See you next time.